Hello and welcome back to the Napoleonic Wars pod. We have one hell of a Marshal Mayhem episode incoming, and I have the resplendent Rachel Stark back in the hot seat, ready to fill us all with knowledge and understanding and empathy and emotion as well as humor and passion and all the wonderful things that Rachel always brings to these episodes. Um, in what is far and away the best loved of the regular content that goes out on this show. Rachel, welcome back. It feels like it's been a heck of a long time since I last saw you, but it can't have been. It must have been a month ago.
It's been about a month. I feel like I've got a lot to live up to now after that introduction.
I'll
But
just
thank
you
you
do
for
you.
having me.
We're going for I say we're going for a colourful one, which is probably the most banal comment you could possibly make about 90% of all of the marshals, because very few of them were the sort of shy retiring type. But this guy was something. As we were saying before we hit record, there's a
Yeah,
lot that gets packed into this 40 years. We're doing Lan.
absolutely. Absolutely. He is colourful seems like a grotesque understatement, quite frankly, but I can't think of anything better to describe him. But there was not a day in this man's life that was boring.
There really wasn't. He is without question the epitome of the come on style of general in that dichotomy between the come on and the go on kind of division of leadership. And that shows with the number of wounds that he racks up. But the guys at times he almost acts like he's got that's too harsh to say that he acts like he's got a death wish, because it's not that Murat-esque style, I don't think. I think it's that inclination to lead from the front and
Hmm,
a
hmm.
very, very keen sense of duty. I was we were when we were discussing in via text in the prep for this. I did kind of suggest maybe we'd call this Lan the Potty Mouth Marshal, but I think I've got a fairer title for this one, which is going to be Lan the Emperor's Best Friend, for reasons that we'll come on to in due course.
I think that sounds appropriate because when I was taking my notes for this, I'd written at the top of my page, Jean Lannes, Napoleon's friend slash the Emperor's Ajax. So I think that maybe does him
That
justice.
Yeah, that sums it up nicely. Okay, we'll get to how this guy interacts with other people in due course. All I will say is that as you start to read the notes in Chandler's uh, multi-chapter edited collection on the Marshals, you sort of think this guy sounds like a perfect match for Murat. You could also almost imagine this guy marrying Murat. And then you find that doesn't transpire to be the case.
That's a
Um,
complicated relationship, that one. I mean, I guess we could in today's parlance we could call them frenemies. I mean, you think of every cliche about teenage girls' friendship that we see on TV. It's there. I mean, on the one hand, they could be unbelievably cordial. They could be very friendly with each other. You know, there's an instance where Murat invites Lang to spend time at a spa with him, says, you know, you get here quickly, enjoy it. They, on the battlefield, they're a formidable duo. They accomplish very excellent things together. But then on the other hand, there were days when they loathed each other. They're both very jealous of their place in Napoleon's favour because they're both part of that inner circle. Um, you know, Lang says what he thinks. You're going to notice that theme throughout this episode. He says what he thinks and he gives zero hoots whether anybody's offended by that from Napoleon down. And, you know, he's on numerous occasions tasked to serve under Murat, and he's very plain about the fact that he thinks that's wrong because Murat's an idiot and he gives orders that are idiotic. And if he had his way, he'd have been doing it, you know, this way. He, it was a very complicated, they were on again, off again buddies, but, you know, on the next day they could be arch nemesis.
the Real Housewives of the Napoleonic Empire is a very strong vibe that comes through with those two. Also very interesting that they both have an eye for Caroline. Um, And I think Lan probably ends up getting the better of that deals, even though it's not necessarily what he wanted initially. I suspect we'll come back to that in due course. I do just want to drop a quick warning to folks. It's Lan. I mentioned it earlier, the potty mouth Marshal. There are going to be points where we quote directly. So if you are of a sensitive disposition, you need to brace yourself for the fact that there are, frankly, some F bombs incoming. Nothing worse than an F bomb, but we're gonna do justice to this guy. He was an individual from whom zero Fs seem to have been given, quite frankly. Um, Early life, though, he's a Gascon. It's so tempting to make some generalizations about Gascons and fiery temperaments and all the rest of it. But he fits that cliche so
It is a
well.
cliche, but it is also accurate. Yeah, he's from Gascony, as is, of course, Murat, as is Jean Baptiste Bernadotte, as is famously, of course, D'Artagnan. And he fits that pattern absolutely to a T. He is bluff, he's forthright, he's honest. I mean, nobody would ever accuse Lannes of duplicity, of intriguing, because frankly, he just said what he thought. If he had a thought, he verbalized it. But he had that sort of tenacity, the ability to inspire, to lead from the front. I mean, there's a reason he's up there with the sort of trinity of top marshals. There's he, Massena, and Davout. Now, they're all very different characters, incredibly divergent personalities, and all different generals. But there's a reason Lannes is up there. His ability to lead, his inherent talent for command is incredible. So he does play very heavily into that Gascon stereotype.
Yeah, there's no question that this was a job that was made for him. He was a man who rose to the times. And it's, again, you can't help but look at what he was destined for, which wasn't really anything at all. Very little in the way of a formal education. Sure, he's got an older brother who goes off to become a priest, but this guy isn't really going anywhere. He's just going to disappear into the obscurity of history. He's not going to end up in a sarcophagus in Vienna, as he eventually does. Spoiler alert, people, if you're not familiar with the concept that Lannes ends up dying on the battlefield. Sorry about that. But again, he's one of those ones who embraces the circumstances. Do we know much about his early life in terms of things pre-revolution?
He was a bit of a hooligan in, all accounts. His family were of farming sort of heritage. His father, also called Jean, you're going to spot the theme in a second, um, bought a townhouse in Lectoure and sort of started trading as a merchant, but he wasn't making anything like as much money to provide formal education for the children. So there were 8 children, and it's very commonly written that there were 4 sons and a daughter. And the reason this mistake is very often made is because the sons were known as, the children were known as follows: eldest daughter, Jeanne, then Bernard, Jean, Bernard, Jean, this one, our Jean, Bernard, Jean, and Marie. Jeanne, sorry, another daughter, and Marie. So there was 5 sons, 3 girls, but the entire family had this very weird tradition that the vast majority of the boys were called Jean or Bernard. And then they gave them a number. So our Jean, Marshal Lannes, was Jean 5. I don't pretend to understand that, but I've checked the date, so it's not somebody picking it up the wrong way. I had the tab open. I've checked the dates. Yes, so Jeanne was 1760. The first Bernard, 1762. This is the one who becomes a priest. First Jean, 1764. Then another Bernard, 1766. Our Jean, 1769. Of course, that year of many personalities. Bernard again, 1771. This one was nicknamed Louise. Then another sister called Jeanne in 1774 and Marie in 1777. So it's genuine enough that there were 8 kids. Many of them had the same name.
I just want to pause for a second and marvel. Another 1769 birth. What was in the atmosphere
I mean,
in 1769? They're all from 17. All of
yeah,
these people. It's just mind blowing.
well, this for people who specialize in other periods, and I make no pretense of having much expertise or indeed knowledge outside this sort of little niche, but has there ever been another year so replete with the birth of great personalities? Because we're talking Napoleon, Jean Lannes, Jean de Dieu Soult, Michel Ney, Castlereagh. Did I say Wellington?
You haven't done, but
It,
yeah,
yeah,
Wellington.
it's nuts.
Baffling, baffling. Okay.
It seems like sort of just one of these sort of cosmic moments. I don't believe in astrology, but maybe there was something going on in the planets that just decided, let's put a lot of very colourful, very stubborn personalities onto the planet.
I mean, imagine if you were born in, there must be a sort of way, there must be a balancing in this. Perhaps 1770, everybody who was born was just really kind of docile and destined for obscurity or something. It's
No, that's when
crazy.
Davu was born.
Okay, so clearly that wasn't the case.
Or was that
Perhaps,
71? But yeah, just immediately after.
yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Um, okay, so let's fast forward to the revolution. He jumps in with both feet, doesn't he? So he's second volunteer battalion of the Guerre. I probably horrifically butchered the pronunciation. Feel free to come at me, people. And so he volunteers, and then suddenly he's a second lieutenant, because of the way that this thing works. They vote on it, and he gets picked. Do we have any idea why he gets picked, or is it just a
Um,
thing?
no, but I suspect it's the trend that kind of presents itself throughout his career. So much of what he accomplishes is just by sheer force of personality. He was very charismatic. He could be charming when he wanted to be, but equally, I think the bluffness, the forthrightness, the very evident, unlimited courage. If you want to be led by somebody, I'd want to be led by someone who was willing to put themselves, from the front and wouldn't ask me to do something they wouldn't.
Tell you what, I'd take Lan over Murat on a
Oh
month of
God, yeah.
Sundays. A month
I
of
think
Sundays.
I think because they're both very brave, sometimes people want to compare that. And I think in terms of physical courage, there's a parity. But for me, and again, I know I'll get sort of irate comments about this, and this is just personal preference. Murat's bravery to me is vainglorious bravery. Lannes' bravery is tenacity to win at all costs and the knowledge that he would inspire his men. And I think he just liked to fight, in all honesty.
Hmm.
He enjoyed the sort of heat of battle in many ways. But for me, it hits kind of very different. He's still vain. He's still, very sensitive of any sort of discrediting of his achievements. But for me, he's less vainglorious than Murat.
I think perhaps an even more interesting question is Lan versus Wellington, who not necessarily in terms of ability, although that is not to disparage against Lan's ability because he was exceptional, from what I've read so far. But I guess I just need to know a little bit more about Lan as an administrator before I can make that judgment. But he's the type to get you fired up and get you. He knows how to extract the most of his men, and part of that is even more so than Wellington. And Wellington wasn't sort of shy, retiring. I'm going to hide behind the other side of the hill, style of commander.
No,
But
but I
Lan
think
is sort of several feet in front of the leading edge of the battalion, saying, "You're coming with me. We're taking that position."
yeah, and I think for me, the Marshal Wellington's the most comparable to his Davé, in
Yes.
that both of them very honourable, very decent men, incredibly talented generals, but they were respected by their men. They weren't loved.
Yes.
Lannes was loved.
And frankly, I can see why. I
Yeah,
genuinely can.
absolutely.
Let's keep pushing through the early parts of his career. I'm tempted to sort of jump to this when the Spanish when the Spanish get involved, um, where he's straight off the bat. There's that kind of sense that he's a brave guy, right? The promotions come reasonably rapidly for him in that early part, partly because he's competent, I guess.
Hmm.
So in the end, he's what, captain of the Grenadiers, and he gets
Yeah,
wounded, and
starts picking
then
up wounds left, right, and centre.
I mean, not surprising if he's going to, literally
It's a
stick himself.
Pharaoh's catalogue.
Yeah. Um, I mean, stick yourself right in the front line, you're going to become a target.
But I
What do
mean,
skirmishers do? They pick out the officers. It's
yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that first, so here's where the swearing is going to come in. That first action in Spain he sees in the Pyrenees and is the only time where Lannes actually ran away from the enemy. We're not talking tactical retreats or maneuvers because he was an excellent tactician. But Lannes' men were ordered to reinforce an attack on a Spanish position, and his battalion were moving forward to support their comrades. When they came across their comrades, essentially, running back towards them, fleeing from the battle, and the momentum of the retreating men sort of overcame Lannes' battalion, and before we knew it, everybody was retreating. And Lannes, mid-run, seems to have this sort of epiphany where he's going, "Why the hell am I running away?" And he stops on the spot and then starts corralling everybody else, shouting at them in very colourful language, "Stop it, god damn you, you arseholes, you're going the wrong fucking way, follow me." But it works. Again, it's this sheer personality. He gets his men, back on side and leads a counterattack. And soon the Spanish were actually driven from their position and he's promoted to first lieutenant. So you can see why they're recognizing very quickly, here's a man with the ability to go far. And he does typify that sort of revolutionary journey of, taking raw talent and taking it right to the top.
there's a fans of Sharp won't like me saying this, but there's a Sean Bean element to that, isn't it? That sort of
Well,
"come on, you bastards" type thing.
I've
Um,
seen it said that Lamb is apparently the inspiration for Sharp, but I feel like I also need to caveat that by saying Lamb would eat Sharp for breakfast and have room
all the
for
Sharp
Harper
fans will come
afterwards.
for you now. They will not be happy.
I'm nailing my colours to the mast. Yeah, he'd eat Sharp for breakfast.
There you go. Feel free to write in to at Rachel Stark. Um, okay, staying with Spain. This I had to scratch my head when I read this and then read it twice to make sure that I wasn't misreading it. But it keeps coming up. So he gets wounded. Um, so he's promoted captain in 1793. He's then wounded in the left arm during a fight at Banyuls. Probably ruined the
He's shot in the
pronunciation there.
arm.
Um, and then whilst he's in hospital at Perpignan, he's recalled to lead another attack. I mean, the
Yeah,
man's been shot in the arm. Well, I don't know if he's
he's
been shot or bayoneted in the arm, but
he's lodged with a widow and her daughter, and he actually says, "Well, give me your scarf to bind my arm." And they kind of say, "Well, you're too ill, be sensible and stay away." But no, he rigs himself up a sling and off he goes. And I mean, that's the kind of pattern we see at Arcola as well. Yeah.
mm,
He was not a man to be dissuaded by a wound or two.
he really wasn't. It's not surprising, therefore, that he ends up with the end that he does, right? Because
Mm.
the guy rides his
Mhm.
luck too many times. It's remarkable that he lasts as long as he does in some respects. Um,
I
so
mean,
he
within that year, he goes from lieutenant to colonel, and that's quite a jump in rank by anybody's standards. But again, not difficult to see why. He keeps picking up wounds, and he keeps being promoted.
and it's that's a very singular trait to have, right? And I'm I'm not sure if I'm somebody who's lavish with their praise. I'm certainly not lavish with my praise when it comes to certain individuals. Cough, Murat, cough. I know that's become a bad joke, folks, but never mind. But with this guy, he seems to. I'm almost kind of. It's baffling the level of kind of like a fusion of bravery and you said it earlier. There's like a tactical competence here and
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
complete dedication to duty. He knows that his place is on the battlefield. That's where he can be most effective, and he's willing to forego his own welfare in order to achieve that. But is that a dedication to his men? Is it a dedication to the cause? Is it because later on the cause is different, right? The cause is Napoleon. So it's a little bit different. Is it sheer patriotism? I'm always very skeptical about notions of patriotism at this point because nations are still a little bit of a woolly concept, and everyone's still trying to work out what how they want to define themselves when it comes to being French or British, or I mean, Germany doesn't even exist, so nationalism isn't a thing during this period. It's still embryonic. What is it that makes him want to do this?
I think it's a sort of volatile mixture of a bit of all of that. He certainly always looked after his men, and he tried to make sure, they were paid and they were fed. And, sometimes that made him, butt heads with Berthier because he wanted to make sure his men were provisioned. Um, he did care about France. I know we're not doing nationalism, but he was a patriot. He was, an embracer of the revolution. I do also think he was just a man who did not take to idleness well. And as I say, you see that in his early life. He is a bit of a hooligan. The older brother goes off to seminary and sort of tries to impart education on all the other brothers. Lannes not really up for that. I mean, his English biographer, Margaret Chrysson, who's been through all of his correspondence, notes that, his spelling, his grammar, it's atrocious all his life. Some folk even allege that he was barely literate. But put him in somewhere where he could actively do something, he was your man.
We'll keep going with the life element. He marries twice, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The first time is quite early on in the story, in the context of what we're going to cover tonight. So 1795, that makes him what? I'm trying to do the maths. 26?
25, 26, yeah.
Yeah, 25, 26. He marries Paulette Merrick. And this was something that I read it and immediately I thought, right, I'm going to ask Rachel that. She was the daughter of a local banker. Now, of course, Lannes has come from farming stock, essentially, but then he's risen to the rank of colonel, but it's colonel in a volunteer unit, not classic French line infantry. So in that complex sort of Venn diagram of social hierarchies and all the rest of it, is that viewed as an appropriate match? Or oh, I'm
Not
getting
by her
shakes in the
family.
head.
Not by her family. So after he'd been billeted the first time with a widow and her daughter, and he'd gone back off to battle, and then he got wounded again, and he came back. He was billeted with Madame Merrick and her daughter. And Lannes, he's uncouth. He's not known for his social graces at all. I mean, Laura Juno wrote of him that he could much easier take a city than he could seduce a woman. He was, his manners weren't brilliant. He was very forthright in what he said. He made no pretension. We talk a lot about authenticity nowadays. I mean, Lannes was someone who was 100% authentically himself his entire life. Um, and he's got battle stories to tell. I mean, this guy's a wounded hero. He's got exciting things to say, but not the sort of conversation that Madame Merrick valued. And her pretensions and her social position was not one that she saw as being comparable. She was very much in the sense that she was the social superior, and this uncouth, rude Gascon upstart was not the kind of husband she wanted for her daughter at all. Now, Paulette disagreed quite vehemently so. So by the time he left the house, there was an attachment between them. And then, of course, later on, he goes back for her and they marry.
So inevitable question, because we do love to champion the Marshal's wives. And no, there aren't going to be any apologies for that, people, because it's brilliant and fascinating. What's Paulette like? First question, but then equally, what does the marriage end up being like? Because Lannes a firecracker.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I have a lot of liking and respect from the guy based on what I've read, but being married to him sounds like it'd be hard work.
An awful lot of management of temper, but for the majority of the time he was away. Um, but I think neither of them potentially went into the marriage fully cognizant of what each other really were. I think they both thought each other were slightly better off than they were. And when the marriage happens, now neither her mother nor her brother attend. This is a disgraceful match as far as they're concerned. He eventually removes her after some time to lecture to be with the in-laws. And we see a situation that sort of, for me, strikes a very strong similarity in how the Bonapartes view Josephine. Because, I mean, she's pretty, she's vivacious. I think Lannes sometimes felt she was a bit too much so when she was around other officers. But he starts getting letters from his brother, complaining about her. She complains about the in-laws, they're too provincial. It's all a bit of a backwater, and she removes herself from the in-laws' house. So there's no love lost there. And I sort of feel like the Lannes family probably didn't help matters by sort of sharing their opinion with him as well. Ultimately, the marriage ends in divorce because when he's in Egypt, she gives birth to a son. He maintained that the dates didn't add up, so the son couldn't possibly be hers. She maintained that she had met up with him while he was engaged in the preparation for the voyage to Egypt, and that's how the dates actually did span. But he sued for divorce, obviously, almost as soon as he got home. He didn't testify himself, he got Napoleon to sort of write a statement saying where he'd been and what he'd done. So they couldn't actually conclusively say he had never met up with his wife to have sex with her at that point, just in the same way that she couldn't conclusively prove that they had. So most biographers just kind of tend to take the whole infidelity thing as is, most written by guys, whereas Margaret Cruzon's biography, she goes into the more legal side of it, and she'd researched the legal documentation and sort of pointed out that actually it doesn't conclusively say he couldn't have been with her, and kind of raises the question that he didn't have the child officially declared illegitimate, which, for somebody as forthright as Lannes, if he felt that strongly, why wouldn't he have done that? So the honest answer is who knows, but they got divorced all the same.
Sure. I mean, it's a dumb question, but family resemblance? Do we have any record of the child and who they end up sort of looking a bit like?
Not that I have on hand, I'm afraid, but I'm
Okay.
actually going to go and have a look about that and see if I can find anything.
I mean, for that period, quite unlikely that there would have been a portrait of them, but it's just sort of one of those that, I mean, obviously there'll be portraits of Lan.
Plenty.
Exactly. So, it shouldn't have been, and everybody has distinguishing features. It would just be a curious thing to sort of look at faces and all the rest of it and try and work out what perhaps went wrong there. Was there a strong indication that the marriage was actually on the rocks before he goes out to Egypt, to perhaps kind of point to an inclination on his part to just take this as an excuse to walk away
I
from the marriage?
don't think they were a natural partnership. I think it was a case of marry in haste and repent at leisure. Their personalities were very different. Their attitudes were quite different. And it probably wasn't entirely inconvenient for Lannes to be able to sort of decouple himself from her just as his social standings, on the rise. Although he did remain quite wary of women for quite a lot of years. Again, they just viewed him as uncouth. He tried his hand with Caroline Murat. She wasn't interested and took up with Murat, which must have stung a bit, given their sort of relationship. He was also floated by General Leclerc to his sister Amy as a potential husband when he wanted to get her settled before going out to the West Indies. And she rejected him as being totally uncouth and went off and married Davout. And I feel like if your social skills are so bad that Louis Nicolas Davout is better by comparison, they've got to be pretty damn bad.
This is true. There is a slap in the face embedded within all of that, isn't there? Do we know what happened to Paulette in later life?
Do you know what I did? And I'm sitting here looking at my notes, and I don't think I've written it down. I think it wasn't penury, but I certainly don't think she had anything like the life she might have done.
Okay, doke. Shall we? Where to head to next? I feel like we need to perhaps jump to Italy. No, no, that's probably a bit too much of a jump. So there's a point to make here, isn't there, that he ends up with the amalgamation that happens within the French army, one of many amalgamations that happens in the French army, folks. Don't come at me about specifics. There's sort of multiple episodes to be done about amalgamations of the French army, but you get the Convention of Paris. There is an amalgamation. Volunteer and line battalions end up kind of being, I guess, brigaded together. And Lannes benefits from that because he ends up not only as head of his brigade, but he's also under Augereau. And then through Augereau, he not only gets the coaching of Augereau, but in time he will wind up in Italy and under the auspices of Napoleon. So just talk us through that kind of period of getting to grips with that new kind of position of command and how he takes that and what he ends up doing in that sort of phase where he ends up ultimately between the marriage and then suddenly under Napoleon's wing, as it were.
Yeah, he did go back home for a brief time as well after his marriage. He went on home on leave to lecture. He attended the Jacobin Club, was made a member. So we can guess that he certainly was a sort of embracer of revolutionary values. But he and Augereau were a sort of natural partnership. Augereau saw in Lannes exactly the kind of guy that he appreciated. No airs and graces, does the job and does it very well, and moreover liked a bit of a fight because that was Augereau to a T as well. And he actually ended up with Augereau because there was a clerical error. He should have gone to the 29th and winds up with the 69th. But he sort of finds that he's in a partnership where things are going to work. And, Augereau writes of Lannes' service, that he executed all of his movements entrusted to General Banel perfectly with as much intelligence as bravery. This officer merits the greatest praise and national recognition. So he's sort of advancing Lannes' star and sort of the public consciousness as well. And of course, when Augereau does go to Italy, Lannes goes with him and thereafter changes the course of his career.
It really does. I guess it's useful at this point to talk about the dynamic because we've touched already on sort of what becomes Lannes' style. I get the sense that he gets sort of trained a bit by Augereau. He then gets trained quite a lot from my reading of What's in Chandler by Napoleon. And Napoleon sort of seems to take a bit of a shine to him. Is there a sense that Napoleon sees a kindred spirit, or how much of this is he just sees what the heck happens at it's Arclay, isn't it?
Yeah.
And just thinks there's a man who I need in my inner circle. Is there a because it comes back to that best friend testimonial, doesn't it? When Lannes dies, that Napoleon
Mm-hmm.
writes, I think it's to Lannes' second
It's his
wife.
wife, to Louise, yeah.
Um, is there that sense that they instantly hit it off? Is it sort of almost like a Berthier-esque?
Pretty much. I mean, Lannes gets to Italy and immediately starts carving a reputation. He fights at Milano, just before Napoleon assumes command. Then he's at Volturi. He's at, I'm probably really mangling these Italian pronunciations, for which I apologize. Millesimo, he's at Dago, he's at Lodi, where he's one of the officers who actually lead the soldiers in the assault across the bridge. Um, he also shows that he's got capacity for ruthlessness. He executes the anti-French rebels after Bassano, with no sort of qualms about it. Again, he was a very straightforward man. If an enemy was an enemy, and if they needed to be shot, they needed to be shot. But our is it Arcoli? Sorry, I've been pronouncing it Arcola. But yeah, so he's
Actually, you may well be right. So I'm. You've got notes from Chandler. I've got Chandler open in front of me. Yeah, in Chandler it's Alcala, and then I've seen it spelled Arcalay, that one without the sort of accent on the E, so it might be Arcole. So somebody will probably scream at me because ignorance, yes, I'm being a Brit, and no, I don't speak languages. I'm a historian, not a linguist. Come at me, as certain people have. But yeah, what you get the general idea, folks. We're
Yeah,
talking
so
about that one.
he's wounded and knocked unconscious when he's leading the assault across the bridge, and his men promptly drag him to safety, get him out the firing line, get him to the field hospital so that he can be treated. And he comes around from this wound and sort of, is coming to himself, regains his consciousness when he hears more gunfire, and immediately goes, "No, I've no time for this. My place is on the battlefield. My place is with my men. Get a horse." And off he goes back again. I mean, with zero sense of self-preservation at all. He rode back to Arcola, joining the battle again, gets wounded and knocked unconscious a second time. The fact he's not left with brain damage is incredible. I mean, to be taking two head wounds in such close proximity, I'm not a medical person, but I imagine that's pretty damn dangerous.
But that's not it. There's another wound.
Oh, there's many many wounds you'll find with Lamb.
But sorry, but he's wounded 3 times in that day alone, isn't
Yeah,
he? And yet
and
still, he's right at the. So I mean, this staggered me. It's almost. Well, no, it's not even almost. It is the case that Lannes saves Napoleon's ass.
mhm,
To not put
he
too fine a point on it.
he puts himself between Napoleon and the advancing Austrians. So Napoleon's horse sort of slipped into a dike, um, and his aides were trying to get him out. And Lamb puts himself, in the enemy's pathway to help make sure that Napoleon gets to safety. And I think that he'd come to Napoleon's notice as a name certainly before then and had been praised, but this sort of cements the relationship thereafter. And it is a very genuine friendship. It wasn't a case of that Napoleon just had Lamb because he was useful, or that Lamb, sort of played on the relationship to get what he wanted. There's a genuine mutual respect and esteem. And of course, Napoleon likes a nice dramatic proclamation. So, he summarizes Lamb on St. Helena. He was wounded at Governalvo. He was still suffering, but he placed himself between me and the enemy. He received 3 wounds, but he did not wish to retire. And of course, he says to Lannes, "There was an instant on the field at Arcola when victory, uncertain, was in need of the audacity of its commanders. Bloody, covered with wounds, you left the ambulance, determined to die or conquer. I saw you constantly on that day in the first ranks of the brave. You are to be the trustee of this honourable flag." So he gives Lannes one of the flags that was captured, which also covers with glory the grenadiers whom you constantly commanded. And it does accurately sum Lannes up. His command was exceptional and his bravery was exceptional. And from that point on, basically wherever Napoleon goes, you'll usually find Lannes quite close behind.
You do. Most obvious being, of course, Egypt, right? And we've touched on this in relation to his marriage. But this is where things start to sour with Murat, right? Because as I understand it, Lan is placed underneath Murat, and then isn't, because he's Lan, he's not backwards in expressing his views on Murat. And Murat doesn't take particularly kindly to that. He wouldn't.
No,
He's Murat.
they both enjoy seeing each other get taken down a peg. And as I say, they sort of switch from friends to enemies to sort of some sort of halfway house, but both are very keen to be able to knock the other off their perch because, they are essentially part of Napoleon's inner circle, and obviously Berthier very quickly becomes the other member as well. But they're all very jealous of his esteem and want to make sure that they all get equal share of it. If anybody seemed to be getting a little bit more preference, then there's a bit of a drama. But before we go to Egypt, I kind of just want to mention this other instance in 1797, which is insane. And I think if you saw it in a film, you genuinely would think it was made up. It's when Napoleon starts moving against the Papal States. Lannes, Marmont, and six other officers sort of distance themselves from their patrol. So there's eight of them, eight total. And they come across a Papal contingent of cavalry of 300 men. Now, the Papal contingent, not unreasonably, think, well, here's an easy picking, and draw their swords. And Lannes just shouts at them, how dare you draw your sword? Sheath them at once. And the officer is sort of so taken aback by the audacity that he kind of goes, oh, very good, sir. And they stop. And then Lannes, seeing that he's kind of got them on the sort of back foot, goes, dismount at once and follow my men to my headquarters. And they do. 8 men against 300. And again, I just feel like if you saw that on screen, you'd go, oh, what a load of crap. Who made that up? It's not remotely realistic. But by sheer force of personality and the authoritarianism that he spoke with, it works. And I can't get my head around it. It is just absolutely bananas. But it sums Lannes up to a T. Nobody else could have done that. Not one of the other marshals. But the sheer barefaced audacity of him, he pulls it off.
One person could have done that and did do it later, right? Napoleon, when he comes back in 1815 and stands
Napoleon,
before...
yeah, but I'm thinking marshals, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's staggering. You can't help wonder if Napoleon had sort of one mind on well, landed it, so maybe I can too.
Try the peak.
Well, exactly. And if folks aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, it's that moment when Napoleon comes back in 1815. He lands. The army is sent south to arrest him, and he says, "Here I am. Take your shot." And history will not forget that man's name. And the army just defects to Napoleon wholesale. It's that, and you look at that and sort of go, really? Of course, it's done brilliantly by Roger Steiger, but never mind. But yeah, it feels very Hollywood, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's hugely relevant to all of this, but is Lannes a character in the upcoming production by Ridley Scott?
No, I don't think so. Nay is, Davout is, and do you know what? Just while we're talking, I'm going to look up the IMDb list. I think there's 3 marshals. I think it's Berthier, Davout, and Lamb. But just while we're talking, I'm going to look it up.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
mean Berthier has to be in there, doesn't he? But yes, seems a shame, really. But it's another one that you could just do a film just
well,
on Lannes, couldn't you?
should any TV producers happen to be listening, I think a 26 episode series on Napoleon's marshals would just be the very ticket.
I
If you feel like you've got something else to do.
as I think I said last time, I am having conversations with my agent about, is there a way for Rachel to find the time in her life to advise on this concept of a show that is the Marshal's Wives' Tale, fundamentally? Because it would, I mean, Sky TV would love it, lap it up like milk. It needs to be done. As far as I'm concerned. And you tell the
Well,
story of Napoleon's empire through the eyes
that
of
would be
these
fun.
women married to these men, and you just get this incredible melting pot. I think it's a genius idea. I just need
Um,
to find the time to sit down and write the
Sorry, just
proposal
on the
and create time in Rachel's schedule to actually be able to advise on it, because there's
magic
no point
one.
in me advising on it.
No, sorry, just an update on the IMDb. No, John Hollingworth is playing Marshal Ney. Youssef Kerkour is playing General Davout. I've seen a photo of him on Instagram in his costume. He looks ace. He properly looks like I imagine Davout would have done in real life. Scott Handy is playing Marshal Berthier, but I think that is it. I mean, Hoche is in it, General Marchand, Bourrienne's in it, obviously. La Bedoye is in it, obviously going to be joining Ney on the not so fun end of Waterloo, but yeah, it doesn't look like La is in it, and yeah, missing a trick there.
That is a shame.
Or
Um,
Murat. I mean, if anybody felt like they were supposed to be in a Hollywood film, it was Murat. I can imagine he's burling in his grave being left out.
Literally what I was about to say. The sulk would be phenomenal. Okay, Egypt and the hey, Muir ends up again being center of attention, right? Because of the fallout that we just mentioned. Um, and and suppression is part of Lannes' playbook in this, isn't he? Because he's the one who's key in. Well, no, that's perhaps an exaggeration. He plays a major role in suppressing the revolt in Cairo after Napoleon's established himself, and then ends up going with Napoleon into what I tend to call the Holy Land. And again, does this thing that Land does of, yeah, I'm going to be in the front line all the time. I'm going to get wounded. And then I might just go back and fight a bit more and get wounded again. And then I think at one point he gets dragged out by his feet because his subordinates literally can't gather the men together long enough without all being shot down to carry him out.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think if we made a Lamb film, we'd need about two just to fit them all in. But yeah, no, he does go with Napoleon and post Italy, wherever you found Napoleon, Lamb was usually fairly nearby. He was actually taken with Napoleon to inspect the preparations prior to going. He set sail with the army from Toulon in May, which is obviously when Paulette was claiming she'd met up with him. Um, and immediately after the expedition, they leaves. They wind up in Malta, wind up taking Malta, and the soldiers are ordered to stay on board the ships to let the situation calm down. And here pops up another theme of Lannes' life. If he's given an order that he thinks is a stupid order, he's very happy to just go, well, sack this. I'm going to do what I please. So he sneaks off the ship. I mean, he'd just been told off by Napoleon for acting too rashly. He says to him, who do you think you're trying to impress? We all know you're brave. If I want you to get killed, I'll let you know about it. Um, so he's just told off for jumping the gun and promptly goes, I don't really agree with Napoleon's orders. Sod it. We're sneaking off the boat. So he sneaks off with one of his subordinates, Subervi, and they decide they're going to go for a little jaunt into Malta. So here maybe is a sharp episode where we're just wandering around randomly looking for adventures. And they come upon a Maltese convent, which is being sacked by French soldiers. Lannes immediately orders them to stop. He tells them that he's going to shoot them if they don't stop, and doesn't get immediately complied with because they're wanting their spoils of war. And frankly, who's this officer who's coming in to try and spoil their fun? But when it becomes clear that he really is prepared to shoot them, the looters sort of clear off. He sends a subordinate to go and get a guard and finds himself sort of sitting there making small talk with nuns. And I sort of feel if there was ever any man less designed to be making small talk with nuns, it was probably Lang. Because I wonder what those conversations were. I would literally pay any money to know. Um, More soldiers returned again, and the ringleader kind of went, well, there's one of you now, you can't stop us. Lamb drew his sword, but thankfully his subordinate turns up with the guard of, you know, reinforcements is the word I'm trying to say. And the rebels were arrested. Four were court-martialed, and the leader who'd sort of defied Lannes was executed. But it was only his sort of tenacity and standing his ground that protected that convent. I wouldn't like to think what would have happened if he hadn't been there.
Can you imagine the nuns trying to process what the hell happened over the course of those few hours? The hell descends on them in the form of these looters. And then a guy who is blatantly Lucifer made flesh turns in the form of Lannes, turns up, gets rid of all of these evil demons of human beings that are trying to do whatever they're trying to do in this convent. And you can use your imagination, people, because it won't have been pleasant. And then it's they must
Yeah,
have sort of not believed what the heck was happening.
he was. Yeah, I mean, it sort of defies what you could put in a novel. And then, of course, throughout the journey to Egypt, It's not just the army that's moving, it's of course Napoleon's, Institute Français, it's the savants, it's the experts and the philosophers and the natural scientists. So they give talks in the evening, imparting their knowledge to the soldiery. Now, Napoleon's 100% for this because he's a man who appreciates science. Lannes not a man who appreciates science, and neither is Junot. And they basically behave. We were having a talk about teaching before this recording started. They basically behave like rowdy teenage lads, and they sit and they snicker and they heckle and they make stupid comments. Till eventually, at one point, Napoleon loses his rag and he chucks Junot out. Lannes left to sit there, but he doesn't ever attempt to hide the disdain he feels for intellectuals, and tells one man that, I'd rather have 50 soldiers than one of you on this boat, till he finds the man's been in the army, at which point his manner changes on a sixpence and he goes, oh, well, that's different. Nice to meet you. So he's very, very forthright with who and what he thinks is acceptable. And I kind of admire that level of honesty. I mean, it's delivered with a bluntness that way transcends rudeness. But again, I feel like he was never anything other than himself, and people at least knew where they stood with him.
I like him. He's a rude git, and
I
he's
like
got
him
plenty
too.
of he's got plenty of detracting features. And I wouldn't want to be him. I wouldn't seek to emulate him. But my God, I like the guy. I can't help myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, he's not a role model to take into a classroom, but he's a role model to
God,
have on a
could you
battlefield.
imagine?
What did you think of this episode? If you're listening on Spotify, you can now post your comments and questions, and we'll get back to you. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest news, sign up to our mailing list. The link is in the description. And don't forget that you can enjoy early access, exclusive episodes, online courses, and much, much more on Patreon. The link is in the description. And if you're looking for personalized merch for the Napoleonic nerd in your life, drop us a line on social media and we can design something for you. Shout outs to our patrons who, at the time of recording in late March 2025, were in the mentioned in dispatches tier: Brendan Teeling, Beatrice de Graaf, Lynn Dawson, Jim Deary, Josh Keeney, Colin Fieldhouse, Jim Getz, Jeff Maple, Robin Brasher, Indiana Fats, Stephen Gillen, Hugh Brennan, Alistair Campbell-Grieve, Andy Meakin, Mark Anscombe, Rob Coughlin, Bruins Girl, Noah Fink, Miles Reedy, Nick Overland, Graham Goodwin, Chris Pramas, Anthony Gumbau, Ian Harding, Anonymous American, James Fluick, Natasha Hobday, Rod Schwager, Chris Kimball, Gary Dennis, Ted Andrews, Richard Anderson, Arthur Forgy, Sam Moore, Wyatt Pollock, Joe Ayres, Darla Vincent, Peter Findlay, Giovanni, Steve Gillen, Jean-Baptiste Van Merlem, Daniel Friedman, Neil Reed, Jonathan Willits, and Wojciech Stefanovic. The Admirals: John Haynes, Mike Guest, Rachel Stark, Mark Duckers, David Priest, David Maxwell, Graham Callister, Sean Sullivan, Stephen Ashworth, Kate Woolcombe, Clemens Beman, Reto the Sci-Fi Fan, Tim Day, Jason Morn, and Tim Pritchard. The Chiefs of Staff, that's Adam Coslin, the Marshals, Ryan Diamond and JC Kaiser, the Legion de Scholars, Dan Hazelwood and Bob Burnham, and in the Crown Yourself tier, Emperor of the First French Empire, Todd Campbell, and Duke of Wellington, Laird Campbell. We'll be back very soon, but until then, this has been the Napoleonic Wars Pod. On behalf of myself, Liam, Luke, Josh, and Zoe, take care of yourselves, folks. Stay well. And as always, thank you for listening.